Okay, get ready, because today we're heading off to the Comoros.
The Comoros.
Yeah, it's an island nation off the coast of Africa.
Oh, interesting. I'm excited to dive into this one.
Me too, and we've got a ton of great sources to dig through.
Awesome.
So this is going to be way more in-depth than just, your typical travel brochure stuff.
Right. We're going deep.
We're talking about uncovering a history that's way richer than, like, a sultan's treasure chest.
And full of surprises, too.
Oh, really? Like what?
Well, for example, you know how the Comoros are sometimes called the Islands of the Moon?
Yeah, I've heard that.
Well, that translation isn't exactly the whole story.
Okay, now you've got me intrigued. You're telling me there's more to the name Comoros than meets the eye.
Exactly.
All right, I'm all ears.
So the name actually comes from the old Arabic name for Madagascar Qur.
Oh, okay.
Basically, to Arabic speakers, these islands were the Malagasy Islands, just like, smaller sibling to their larger neighbor.
So right off the bat, we're already busting myths and digging into the linguistic roots.
Yes, exactly.
I love it. But before we go too far back in time, let's get our bearings. Where exactly are these islands on the map?
So picture yourself sailing down the Mozambique Channel.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
That stretch of the Indian Ocean between Mozambique on the African mainland
But
and Madagascar.
gotcha.
Just north of Madagascar, you'll find the Comoros.
Okay, so strategically placed. I can already see how that location played a big part in their story.
Oh, absolutely. It was a prime spot along historical trade routes.
Which I'm sure brought them both riches and their fair share of rivalry, I'd imagine.
You're right on the money.
But from what I've seen in these sources, these islands have a fiery side too.
Fiery.
Literally, we're talking volcanic eruptions.
Oh, right.
They forged more than just like those dramatic landscapes you might imagine.
That's right. The volcanoes had a hand in something else, too.
Because 3 of the islands, Grand Comore, Anjouan, and Moheli, they've actually got deposits of gemstones.
Gemstones.
Yeah, spinel and corundum.
Wow. And to think it's all thanks to those volcanoes.
It's like something straight out of an adventure novel. You've got these volcanic islands strategically placed, potentially sitting on like a treasure trove of precious stones.
Quite the combination, right?
This is shaping up to be one fascinating deep dive.
Yeah.
Where do we even begin to unpack centuries of history?
Well, to understand the Comoros of today, we need to go back to the very beginning.
Okay, back to the beginning.
And that takes us all the way back to the 7th century.
Wow, the 7th century. Who are the first people there?
Well, that's when Bantu-speaking people, probably from the African mainland, first set foot on these islands.
So the very first chapter of the Comoros story starts with these Bantu settlers.
Exactly.
I'm guessing their arrival kind of set the stage for the cultural tapestry we see today.
Without a doubt.
And I'm sure the story just gets more and more complex as we move through history.
Oh, absolutely. And it gets even more interesting a few centuries later.
Really? When was that?
Around the 10th century.
Okay.
That's when Arab traders arrived.
And they brought more than just goods, I'm assuming.
You got it. Their influence, especially the arrival of Islam, left a huge mark on the islands.
Which is amazing when you think about it, how those early encounters still resonate in the Comoros today.
It's incredible, right?
You can still see traces of that Arab influence everywhere, right?
Yeah, like woven into the fabric of their society.
In their language, their religious practices, even their everyday customs.
Exactly. It really shows you the lasting power of cultural exchange.
It's like those early interactions are part of the Comoros' DNA.
I like that.
Speaking of cultural threads, I read something about a golden age for the islands.
Oh, yes.
Something about their location, how they were a maritime hotspot.
You're talking about the 16th to 18th centuries.
Gotcha.
The Comoros were perfectly situated along those busy trade routes connecting Europe to the east.
So they were like a vital point for all those ships.
Exactly. Ships carrying spices, textiles, all those treasures, they'd stop in the Comoros.
Okay, so imagine this. You're a sailor back then, exhausted after weeks at sea.
I can imagine.
And suddenly, these lush islands appear on the horizon.
What a sight that must have been.
Promising not just a break, but like a chance to restock and trade.
It was a welcome relief for those sailors.
The Comoros were like this bustling crossroads of the Indian Ocean.
Exactly. And this period brought so much wealth and prosperity to the islands.
But as we know, all good things.
Must come to an end.
It's the circle of life, I guess. What happened? Did it have something to do with the Suez Canal?
You know it.
I knew it!
When the Suez Canal opened in 1869, it totally changed maritime trade.
Oh, of course, ships could bypass that long journey around Africa.
Exactly. And unfortunately for the Comoros, This meant their importance as a trading hub. Well, it basically diminished.
It's amazing how one event, thousands of miles away, can have such a huge impact.
It really is.
And the shift in global trade, I bet it left the Comoros vulnerable, especially with European colonialism starting to take hold.
Absolutely right.
Yeah.
The decline of their maritime power happened right as France was flexing its colonial muscles in the region.
And this is where things get really interesting because, well, France established protectorates over Grand Comore, Mohili, and Anjouan, right?
Right, in the late 19th century.
But Mayotte, the smallest of the four main islands, has a totally different story.
Oh yeah, Mayotte is a whole other chapter.
Because Mayotte wasn't just brought under French control.
No, it wasn't a hostile takeover or anything like that.
It was sold.
Sold, exactly.
Wow. That is not your typical colonial playbook.
Not at all. Back in 1841, long before the other islands became French protectorates, the Sultan of Mayotte, André Ansoli, was in a tough spot.
What do you mean?
He was facing pressure from rival sultans and the threat of invasion. So he made a deal with France.
He sold Mayotte in exchange for protection.
Exactly. And, some people even say it was for his own personal gain.
Wow.
Yeah. And that one decision would end up shaping the destiny of Mayotte and fueling tensions that still continue to this day. It's a story of a deal with some serious consequences.
It really is, like planting a seed of unrest that just wouldn't stop growing. But let's fast forward a bit to the 20th century.
Okay, sounds good.
I can only imagine that after centuries of colonial rule, the push for independence was, well, tumultuous, to say the least.
It was. And this is where the story of the Comoros starts to feel like a political thriller.
A political thriller. Okay, tell me more.
So, when the Comoros declared independence from France in 1975, it was with this unresolved issue, with Mayotte hanging over everything.
Right, because Mayotte had that unique relationship with France.
Exactly. And the rest of the archipelago was ready to go their own way.
So you've got this archipelago saying, we're independent, but then there's Mayotte holding on to its special status with France. I bet that didn't go over well.
It created a huge rift, a rift that's still felt today.
Really?
The Comoros has never recognized Mayotte's decision.
Wow.
They claim the island is rightfully theirs, and it sparked this decades-long territorial dispute.
Which, of course, brings international law into the mix.
Exactly. It's a complicated situation, trying to sort through this colonial legacy.
Absolutely. But before we get too far into that, I'm curious about the political climate within the newly independent Comoros. What I've read paints a pretty chaotic picture.
It wasn't a smooth transition, that's for sure.
Yeah.
It was a time of serious political instability.
Instability.
Marked by a string of coups.
Cool.
The nation was constantly on edge. And at the center of it all was this figure, almost unbelievable, really, a French mercenary named Bob Denard.
Bob Denard. Now, that's a name I have to hear more about. It's not every day you come across a mercenary who's basically a kingmaker in a newly independent nation. Who was this guy? How did he get so much power in the Comoros?
Picture this, a charismatic but totally ruthless soldier of fortune. Wore Hawaiian shirts, had a knack for, well, exploiting chaos.
Okay, I'm starting to get a picture of this guy. So he shows up in the Comoros when?
Oh, right when things are at their most chaotic.
Mm.
In 1975, weeks after they declared independence, he leads a coup that overthrows the brand new president.
The newly elected president. Who was that?
Ahmed Abdallah Abderrahmane.
Okay, so Denard just waltzes into this already unstable situation and seizes power. Talk about a hostile takeover, but that wasn't the end of his meddling, was it?
Not even close. 3 years later, Denard's back, orchestrates another coup to reinstall Abderrahmane, who's now basically his puppet.
His puppet? Wow.
For a while there, Denard was running the show. He controlled the Comorian army, called the shots from behind the scenes.
It does sound like something out of a spy movie.
Doesn't it?
Coups, mercenaries, political intrigue. It's no wonder the Comoros struggled to find its footing as a nation.
It was a tough time for them, definitely.
So while Denard's busy pulling strings at the national level, I understand things weren't exactly peaceful within the islands themselves.
You're right, there was another layer of complexity brewing. Internal divisions were threatening to tear the archipelago apart.
Internal divisions? What do you mean?
Remember that whole desire for autonomy we talked about earlier? Well, it seems some islands felt that way more strongly than others.
Okay, so as the nation's trying to break free from its colonial past, some islands are thinking, maybe we want a divorce of our own.
That's exactly it. In 1997, little over 20 years after the Comoros declared independence from France, the islands of Anjouan and Moheli decided to follow suit.
What's really?
They declared their own secession from the newly formed Federal Islamic Republic of the Comoros.
Wow, so now we've got islands seceding, coups, mercenaries calling the shots. It's a lot. What was behind this fragmentation? Why were Anjouan and Moheli so unhappy?
It was a whole bunch of things, really. Long-standing grievances over how resources were divided up, feelings of being ignored by the central government on Grand Comore, and a belief that no one was looking out for their interests.
So they felt really alienated from the rest of the Comoros.
Exactly. And it's interesting because while Anjou and Moheli were pushing to split from the Comoros, they were also hoping for a reunion of a different kind.
What do you mean?
They wanted to go back to being ruled by France.
Oh, wow. So they saw being part of France as a better path.
Yeah, they thought it would lead to more stability and a stronger economy, kind of like Mayotte had.
It's like they were saying, hey, France, remember us. Can we come back?
Exactly. It was a strategic move for sure, but it didn't really pan out.
I guess France wasn't eager to jump back into that situation.
Yeah, you can't really blame them for being a bit hesitant after everything that happened. But let's shift gears a bit and talk about the people living in the Comoros today.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of political ground, but what about the human side of this story?
Right.
The sources painted a pretty bleak picture, to be honest. The Comoros is one of the poorest countries in the world, right?
Sadly, that's true. The economic troubles, the political instability, the lack of resources, it's all taken a toll. There's
Yeah.
this one statistic that really struck me.
Oh, what is it?
More Comorians live in France than in the Comoros itself.
Wow. That's really telling.
It speaks volumes about the connection between those countries, but also the tough economic realities that force people to leave.
It's like this bittersweet thing, this deep connection to their homeland, but the need to search for opportunities elsewhere.
Exactly.
It also makes me think about the remittances, the money sent back home by Comorians living abroad. That must be a big deal for their economy.
It's essential, actually. Remittances account for 25% of the Comoros' GDP. Think about it. For every $100 circulating in their economy, $25 came from overseas.
25%, that's a lifeline, not just a safety net.
It is, but it's not a permanent fix. It highlights how crucial it is for the Comoros to develop a sustainable economy.
It's like putting a Band-Aid on a broken bone, right? It might help temporarily, but it doesn't address the real problem.
Exactly.
And I imagine this reliance on France, on that money coming in from abroad, comes with its own issues.
It does. That dependence on France, especially the hope for a better life in Mayotte, has fueled a very dangerous and tragic trend. Kwasa.
Kwasa. Those are the makeshift boats, right?
Yeah.
The ones people use to try to reach Mayotte.
Exactly. People, many of them young, are so desperate for a better life that they're willing to risk their lives on these overcrowded boats.
It's heartbreaking.
It really is. The journey is incredibly dangerous. It's a stark reminder of the human cost of these complex situations.
It really makes you appreciate the resilience of the human spirit, though. Despite all these challenges, there's still this vibrant culture.
Oh, absolutely.
The sources mention this thing called the grand marriage tradition on Grand Comore. Can you tell us more about that? What makes it so special?
The grand marriage is more than just a wedding. It's a huge celebration, a public display of social status, and a testament to how strong their community ties are. We're talking ceremonies that last for days, feasts that could feed a small army, everyone dressed in their finest clothes.
It sounds amazing.
It's a tradition that's been passed down for generations.
It must be deeply rooted in their culture.
It is. And here's the thing. The grand marriage is incredibly expensive. People often save for years, even relying on help from relatives abroad.
Wow. So it all ties back into those economic realities. They're willing to make huge sacrifices to uphold their traditions.
They are, and while the grand marriage shows us this rich cultural tapestry, it also reminds us of the environmental challenges facing the Comoros.
Right. Our sources mention deforestation, particularly on the island of Anjouan.
Yeah. Anjou was known for its ylang ylang, a fragrant flower used in perfumes and things. The demand for its oil has led to deforestation.
That's tough. Trying to balance economic needs with protecting the environment, especially on fragile islands like the Comoros.
Exactly. And that's something we all have to figure out, not just the Comoros. It's a global issue, finding ways to promote both economic growth and environmental sustainability.
Absolutely. It seems like every step of the way we encounter this tension between progress and preservation.
It's a delicate balance, that's for sure.
As we wrap up our deep dive into the Comoros, one thing's clear. This island nation has a truly captivating story.
It really is a unique blend of history, culture, and resilience.
We've traveled through centuries, explored ancient traditions, and grappled with the harsh realities of their past and present.
From volcanic eruptions to colonial legacies, mercenary takeovers to economic struggles, the Comoros has seen it all.
And through it all, the Comorian people have shown incredible resilience.
They have.
They've held onto their culture, fought for their independence, and continue to adapt to ever-changing circumstances.
It's a powerful reminder that history isn't just something we read about in books.
It's something that shapes lives, influences choices, and connects us all.
Exactly.
So as you continue exploring the Comoros on your own, we leave you with this thought. What lessons can we learn from their journey? How can we, as global citizens, contribute to a future where nations like the Comoros can thrive, where progress and preservation go hand in hand?
Those are questions worth pondering.
Absolutely. The Comoros, though small on the map, offers big lessons for all of us.